Welcome back, Isaiah, for
Ah,
round
Yehuda,
two.
round two. It's so good to be back. It's so good to be back. I feel like we haven't gone anywhere. I feel like I mean, we've gone to many places, but even a minute away from you, it feels like telepathically we're still connected.
Baruch Hashem. Yeah. So part two, guys, because this is really we're just the part one from yesterday where we got into this. I want to continue this conversation, and we're going jumping straight in because we had all the introductions already yesterday. First of all, I just want to point out Isaiah and I talk a lot, and in a lot of the conversations, I definitely one point I want to highlight that really opened me up was the idea of not how because I don't feel that experience of being black. They say driving while black, how people get pulled over constantly, getting called out, getting racially profiled for being black, and therefore having to deal with those issues and suffering because of it. Even the minor sufferings, which are like getting pulled over 5 times a month for no reason, getting stopped on the way. That's like ridiculous. And if you don't feel it and if you don't know it, then you're like, I don't see it, so it's not there.
Right.
And so I want to say that is definitely something that I've learned, not just from our last conversation, but from many of our conversations, and opening up to see things from somebody in another way. And I think it's really important in this conversation. We're going to be bringing up, and I want to jump straight in. We're going to hit a couple of intense topics that are so racially charged, because we're in a racially charged atmosphere, and we want to talk about these things, but we want to bring them up in a healthy way. So first thing is we're definitely going to talk about Black Lives Matter, and what that means. And what I think we want to start off with, there's this idea of what did you call it, Isaiah? Yeah, it's
Systemic racism
systemic racism, right? Now, and
or institutionalized
or
racism.
institutional racism. Now, I hear that there's different ways of hearing what that means. So I think, Isaiah, maybe you could tell us a little bit of what it means. I'll tell you maybe what I've heard afterwards if I heard something different, and maybe give us a little bit of context. Like, a lot of us are here and we're like, oh, the world started when I showed up on the scene, and it's been revolving around me. And so if I don't see something or I don't experience something, it's not there. But really, we're not really, this racial black rights and is an issue. It's not ancient history. This is where in
Right.
it. So give us some context and
Context,
right in.
super important. So shkayach, thank you, Rabbi Huda. So as we spoke about with round one, we gave some context around American Jewry, American Jewish history. I think context is super important, specifically as it relates to understanding racism in America and racism in the West, and understanding the history of Black Americans. I think is essential to us understanding the Lashonos, systemic racism. So what do these things mean? And I find that when we talk about these topics, a struggle that I've been having is it's easy to oversimplify any narrative, right? The Jewish people's narrative. We joke, but maybe it's not so funny. Like we say every holiday is what? It's like they tried to kill us, we won, and now we eat. Or we oversimplify our whole experience. And so I think for the average person, looking in at Black history, you might assume that it's like, okay, they were kidnapped, they were enslaved. That was just a whole horrible backwards time in history, and we've grown and we've evolved into higher level beings. And there was emancipation, there was freedom, there was liberation. They were no longer slaves. And okay, if you have a little bit more, you might know, yes, it's true that even after the Civil War, and I think we mentioned this in the last session, that during the 1850s, over 21 million people were legally enslaved in America. And then post-emancipation, many would say, okay, those 21 people were now free, and the slave ships are no longer transporting and selling and buying, and the economics of the slave trade essentially, was halted in its tracks. But then we know there was Jim Crow, right? And those laws that barred entry into civil life, essentially, for people of color. It lasted 100 years until till really the Civil Rights Act. And okay, so fine, you say, and then there was Jim Crow, and then there was civil rights, and then there was Dr. King, and then like a whole lot of things happened, and then like Obama became president, and racism doesn't exist anymore. Like that's the arc. Okay, if we talk through that arc, it's very easy to like get lost in like, wait a minute, like these protests, who's doing it? There's plenty of Black people who are like, you know, fighting for an agenda that's not about human rights and fighting for Black power, or there's plenty of white people who are fighting, you know, fighting against other white people, and it's making it look like it's Black people. It's many Black people who are partnering with white people to figure out how to confuse the agendas of other Black. It's like wherever you're holding with the politics of race, you're right, Yehuda. Like we live in a racially charged society where it's easy to push away nuance. And friends, people do that to Jews all the time, and Orthodox Jews all the time. When people say, "Oh, I didn't know Orthodox Jews were," it's like, why do you think I'm like this narrow little thing, and like you haven't like captured any nuance of like my identity and the fact that like Yehuda, I don't know if this is okay, but like Yehuda and I used to like mamish like Fabrang on Metallica. Like that was like, what do you mean? Oh, I didn't know Orthodox Jews. What do you mean? Like, right, finding the wisdom in anything that might exist, like is, you know, we get reduced. So when we talk about this topic of systemic racism, I just think that like that's as a hakdama, you know, I think it's important because it's easy to make a choice when you're not appreciating literally the hundreds of millions of people over hundreds of years who were enslaved and were maimed and were killed, and like objectively factual information, and were all these horrible things that it's like, you know, to not focus so much on the negative, but to focus on the negative for the sake of bringing more light into the world. Pick up any book on Black history. It's horrible to read about, and you know, we read Eicha with trepidation, but like Eicha exists not only 2,500 years ago. You know, the stories of Eicha exist in so many of our traditions. It's
well, Jewish history hasn't been rosy, and we you know, we just had a Holocaust 70 years ago. We're not
Exactly.
distant from it.
So listen, so what I would say is, yes, we have made progress as a society. Yes, it's true, the Civil Rights Act, Jim Crow came to a close. Like, you know, it's not to say that America hasn't grown, but the narrative of Black American history is a narrative of oppression and hardship. It's a narrative of being redlined, where you don't have access to certain amenities, like literally like parks and streets, and it's where environmental racism, right, where people who are most impacted by like trash and garbage and fumes and pollution, and like where the power plants are and where the trash heaps are places where predominantly are people of color. Like we know that that frankly for hundreds of years, when most people who were of European descent had a bit mobility, access to certain things, hundreds of years went by where the Black American or the African and Black people in America simply didn't have the same opportunities. So to say, now it's different, segregation doesn't exist, according to law, Obama was president, all these things, right? To say that there are not just embedded within the fabric of our West, of the American society that was built upon race. It was built upon this black-white dichotomy. When it was talking about all men are created equal, it was speaking specifically about white men, right? And so the institutions, have we done tshuva? Have we grown? Have we come to a higher level? Of course, but is there institutionalized power dynamics that simply disarm the Black man's ability to be confident, or the Black person's ability to be confident in society? Are there systems that exist in all spheres, whether it's in economics and business world, whether it's in education, whether it's in food systems? There's hundreds of studies showing how Black people are disadvantaged and live shorter lifespan and are more, you know, and so, yes, some might say that has nothing to do.
Right, but there's also a lot of other statistics showing that, you know, in many areas, Black women are actually doing way better than white women on average, because you know they're much more out there going and getting and doing things. And like there's a lot of statistics that are showing, meaning you're right, and there definitely is let's say a certain handicap.
Before we go there,
Yeah.
narrative wise, it's like the idea of trying to use like modern statistics, I think like in any direction of like, right, the way non-Jews, let's say, want to say like, oh, Jews are all white and they run Wall Street and they this and that and power, and like, oh, the Holocaust like didn't really happen. It was only some places where there were things, and really most people were treated really like it's rewriting narratives, and people want to show, look at Jews today. They own this sports team and that sports team. What happened with Nazi Germany? That's not real. It wasn't. Look at them. They had a whole plan. They made that story of like these radical, crazy stories of like trying to reclaim the Jewish experience and trying to take away the narrative of the Jewish people through like studies and through like claims, elders of Zion, all these crazy things. So like, I just want you to like, I personally feel like when we start to quote things like, we forget that like bottom line period, like people used to be lynched because they were Black. So that's like one stage. And then people were barred entry into rooms because they were Black, and that was another stage. And then people were mass incarcerated, and millions of Black people were put into jail from the 60s to 2000. It was literally some years tripling in how many Black people were going into jail. And okay, you could say that what, Black people became more aggressive and so more Black people needed to go to jail. Okay, that'd be a really intense claim. There's a lot that would disagree with that. And I just want to say that we, like, as we talk about modern issues in the last 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, 30 years, 40 years, we have to remember the bottom line is the bedrock of the Black person's experience in America put them at a disadvantage. And that, my friend, is what I call systemic racism. L'chaim.
So that aspect of systemic racism, saying that they've been disadvantaged and they're starting off with a handicap, and that the last 100 years, yes, I don't think.
And there remains. There's a Rishima, there's a Roshem of this experience. There's remains where we see even now where there's predominantly Black communities disadvantaged in this way and that way and this way and that way. And you might say, okay, there's other ways that they are at advantage, but we see that there's still remnants of, bottom line, of Jim Crow, of slavery.
Right.
So
that's true.
Inheriting.
There's a second narrative of systemic racism, which is like, which goes, to the point of saying like, if somebody claims that they're not even a racist, then they really still are a racist, because how dare you? You are so white that you don't even know what it means to not be racist. I'm saying, but this is a lot of the systemic racism that the Black people are completely owed everything, and therefore there's a moral high ground.
Can I just say real quick though? What you're describing, by the way, I think is a perversion of this of the issue. I think you're right that a lot of people are trying to pull us off the derech of standing for racial justice and standing for human rights and standing for kavod habrios. People are dragging us off with politics. Politics.
See, that's exactly.
It's not policy. Not policy. Politics.
See, this is Isaiah. This is what we're going to get into.
This thing and that thing.
This is exactly what I want to be talking about with you today, because I think that if you take the average Republican, okay, and you pick him up, the narrative is he's a racist, he's white, he has privilege, and his voice is not important. Okay, that's what's being said by all of these movements. And the truth is that my belief is if you pick up the average Republican, he's going to believe that he believes that Black people have suffered greatly at the hands of racial injustice, and he's going to believe that, hey, we need to put programs and things into place to be able to set Black people up to help them to deal with whatever handicap that it was, and that we need to build up inner cities, and we need to set people up to be able to be more successful, and that we need to
policy.
That's but this is the average Republican, and I believe, and from what I've seen, this is what's being said by them. Meaning, it's not something that's being said just in response to there being a riot. This has been spoken about, and I've been. You've been hearing this. What do you mean? There's been tons of this. I've been listening to Ben Carson for years. and you listen to the way he talks about things, and the way he's the policies that he's been talking about for years. We're talking about and Ben Carson, but Ben Carson, frankly, like you hear sometimes the way that a lot of, let's say the Black Lives Matter movement and other of those ilk, the way they talk about him, it's embarrassing.
So
And
again,
I use him as an example, but there's a million of people like him, black and white.
no, I number one, I want to appreciate you bringing us to this topic, because I think it's something that we're all feeling, we all see, we've all inherited. Like we've been living in a generation of severe identity politics. There's a privilege police goes around saying you can't speak, you can't do this because you have more privilege, you have less privilege, you have more money, your position in society.
Which once again is all racism again.
So there's absolutely become a radicalization in America, I think, around politics, where we find a narrative that shows that there's a growingly like smaller center, like the center is getting smaller, and the idea of staying in a center voice in this like really like sometimes vicious political sphere. And so like when you throw race and racism into that, it's like who's feeding which agenda almost. It's like you don't know what's where and who's who and what's what. And I honestly think it's a distraction. I mean, you think about people like Dr. King, and again, Malcolm X was pro-violence at certain stages of his career, but even towards the end of his life, they went back to like Yesodei, like Kavod Habrios. They were just like, all right, like, listen, white people, we need to do this with you. We need to work together. Like, we're all in this together. Like, when people are trying to divide us, white people who are trying to divide us, black people who are trying to divide us, people who are playing into political games, like literally the voice of the civil rights era was to try to keep the center. And what the center is that civil rights issues are human rights issues. And we have to remember that while people try to create more loud noise to distract us. So just as we engage in this topic, specifically around the politicization of race and, the smaller center that exists, and people who are anxious, oh my gosh, Sefer Bamidbar, what a crazy time to be talking about the fate of the 21st century while also learning the parshios of Sefer Bamidbar. Oh my gosh, Chumash HaPekudim, this book of counting, Tafkid, this book of appointing, who has a role, who counts, who doesn't count, when do you count, when do you not count, Lama Nigarav, why should I be left out, Hibadlu Mitocha Ida Hazos, separate yourself. Like, it's like this endless, and it's heated in voice. Who gets the voice? Who decides? And so what I find most sad, and maybe this is like entering into Black Lives Matter, is that I agree that so much of the politicization of race is a tool to like disarm people and make them feel helpless and make them feel like they are the worst and a part of the problem, and that they can never be a part of the solution, and that everything is gone and corrupt and broken, and there's no room for any
on
light.
Both sides, actually.
And there's it's extreme. By the way,
you've been evil. You are evil because you're white and because you're privileged, and therefore you're an evil person no matter what you do. And you are black and you've taken advantage of, and therefore no matter what happens, you should go out and loot and be violent and be anti-Semitic and all these things, because it's.
But I think if we're getting to like, if we're going to the Chadrei Chadarim, if we're like really trying to like get down, and be real and really like speak with integrity, like really, we realize that like that voice of politicizing race. I'm not talking about policy, by the way. Policy, we need policy. We know Dina D'Malchus Dina, we need law. The Jewish people have been very influential in making sure that the West has strong law because it protects us. just as much as it protects anyone else. And so if that's our only interest, then that's still a really good interest. Like if it's self-interest that makes you want to stand for, democratic rights and making sure that people are not oppressed. Anyway, so I just want to say though, like again, like I don't want to lose my point. When it comes to politicizing race and it drags people off their derech, it silences people. It prevents people from engaging in a discussion. And the reason why that's so problematic is because what it does is it draws lines in the sand and it prevents people from being in dialogue the way we're doing right now as chevra, and it prevents people from believing that they could understand the other person's side, so to speak, when really they can, based on just having a few heartsig, interactions, and where you really with a l'chaim in hand if you need, or a lamayim in hand, or coffee and whatever, you go deep and you take away the politics and you realize that we should just appeal to the good in each other, and that's, by the way, I want to remind you that leadership, there are plenty of leaders who are centrist in the Black movement who are saying these things. It's just, are they highlighted? Is that the narrative on the news? Is that what the media is covering?
Where are they?
Where it breaks my heart more than anything though is where someone says, I can't touch Black Lives Matter. I can't touch Black Lives Matter. It's clearly pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. The Black Lives Matter movement has aligned itself with Palestinians and is anti-Israel.
Wait, not just Palestinians. Black Lives Matter is a clearly hardcore liberal left party, which
why is
that?
So what I'll say though, the thing that makes me sad about it is when people say, because of the movement, or movement for Black Lives, this term Black Lives Matter, the associations that we all have with it, we simply people take a step back. They just they simply say, forget racial justice because of Black Lives Matter.
No, they're not. Nobody's saying forget racial justice.
No, I'm
because
just saying,
if you look
Yehuda, what I'm trying to describe though is that there are people who, once they see that term, it triggers them immediately to not realize that we still have a moral, halachic, spiritual obligation to make sure that they covered up brios, right? But tell them
so that's
all
the stance. That's what I would like to highlight, and I like to say is that I don't think that there's anybody out there, especially in a position of power, if you want to get involved politically, that doesn't believe that. I doesn't believe that we need all these racial justice things. Like this whole idea that if you're a Republican, you don't believe in racial justice is ridiculous. Nobody believes that. Nobody. Right. And that's what I'm telling you. But I'll be honest with you, when I hear Black Lives Matter, I run the other direction because everything that I look at what they're doing, I don't see as being, first of all, I see it being as, it doesn't make any sense to me, and it all seems wrong. Outrageously wrong.
Listen, I hear what you're saying. I mean, for me personally, I also have hesitance, and I have not endorsed Black Lives Matter.
I'm saying, so we need to talk about that. We need to clarify, saying if we want to talk about racial justice, Black Lives Matter and these things that are happening right now, I honestly don't believe that it has anything to do with racial justice.
So I wouldn't, right.
We're narrowing ourselves in over here to get to kind of where we agree and where we disagree, because let's leave it.
So let's really talk about it.
The crux of it.
Again, Black Lives Matter is a new term, right? Let's not be distracted from movements for Black power in general and throughout Jewish history. There's even this term Jews of color, right? It only came to be a term because we needed a term to describe the fact that we have a multiracial nation and we come from different places, and Garrus or not, right? Our backgrounds, we are a multiracial people from all over the world. That's just the gullus that created this beautiful tapestry, right, of what Jews look like. But we needed a term Jews of color because there was a forgetfulness, there was a lack of visibility, there was a sense of being on the periphery. There was no way of calling out who you are, right? Right, even Bamidbar again, right, to your tribe, to your daga, where you needed something to be seen, and so
you're
Jews
allowed
of color,
to be
that
different.
term came up.
You're allowed to have
Sorry?
12. You're allowed to be different. You're allowed to have 12 different
Exactly.
tribes,
No, so
and
what I'm
we
trying,
can right.
I'm
But
agreeing
there's
with
a
you.
unity there.
So I agree, and I think this is where it needs to be, and any part of Black Lives Matter which is missing this, I think we need to start talking about. Again, you're right. We're getting to the Nakuda Pnimi of this work and the inner conversation. But when it comes to movements, again, these terms were given to create momentum for transforming systems. You need lashonos. We know these things already, that it helps. So Black Lives Matter was a new term, right? Before that, Black Power, Black Pride, like there was different like hashtags, so to speak, without hashtags, right? We shall overcome, like,
Right.
like lift every voice and sing. These are other bituyim, like phrases and sentences that were put together to develop, again, movements. Like, so the fact that Black Lives Matter in this current political, cultural, social moment in American history has formed the way it's formed and is entering into the sphere in such a toxic, like radicalized country, post 9/11 country, for real, right? Like ISIS, this, that, the next, just insane Islamophobia,
Well, I think
racism,
it's actually
anti-Semitism.
I think
What?
it's actually media propelled, where through globalization you have a few people that are taking over way too much power, and they are completely hijacking this entire situation this is a power grab.
It's a power grab.
It's a
It's
power
absolutely
grab.
so, and that's, by the way, where, like, if you would look at the hashkafa of Dr. King, and I'm not going to quote Malcolm X because largely his life, I think, shows a little bit more of a harif and fierce and angry approach. Dr. King was also very angry, don't get me wrong, but his anger was channeled through a prophetic voice of thinking through, like what we spoke about in part one, like about philo-Semitic values, about Torah,
Yeah.
Mosaic.
I think being angry is not necessarily an issue. See, that's also
So,
meaning
but
we
I
can
just
get
wanted to
very
point
angry
out,
about something.
I agree.
But I
So
think we should.
Dr.
Yeah.
King didn't want us to lose sense. He didn't want us to lose a sense of, he didn't want us to get pulled by the narratives of, like what you were saying, globalization. He didn't want us to get pulled away by power grabs. Like, oh, they did something to us, so we're going to do something. But like that intent, like, again, like, I'm not saying that the movement right now for dismantling racism in America is organized, is methods and approaches are correct, or right, this particular piece of the movement, Black Lives Matter, I wouldn't say that their methods and approaches are correct. Do they want to see racial equity? Like, I would say not all of them. Some of them, I mean, I'll just tell you, I know personally people, who have very extreme views of what should be the future of America as it relates to race relations, like, and whether people of color or white people. I've heard, again, keeping in mind half my family comes from a tradition that's both very white, meaning fought in the American Revolutionary War, and very black, we're slaves in America, and like both sides of my family have expressed their own voices of what futures of race relations could look like. I just think that, like, to me, where I get most hung up is when we use Black Lives Matter, the term, as an excuse to not engage in promoting a conversation around racial equity, human rights.
So I want to say something a little. Radical.
Yeah.
I want to say that I don't think that this whole situation that we're dealing with is really a racial issue. I think that what we're dealing with is another thing entirely, and that we need to. And this is not denying that there's racial issues, and this is not denying that we need to have reform, and this is not denying that we need to be working on these things. I agree with all of that, but I think that what we're seeing right now,
you're saying the core of what's going on right now.
What we've been seeing dominating the headlines, not just in the last 2 weeks, but in the last couple years, is a struggle for power of the far radical liberal left, trying to breaking this open into a hardcore extreme and trying to take control of things and dismantling the core principles of America. That's what I see.
Okay.
And it's radical, but that's what I'm seeing.
I don't think it's radical. Can I tell you what I see?
Yeah.
I see that and systemic racism.
But
I
see,
don't know.
so the systemic racism that
I
you're
don't see why
talking about is
you need to be right for like one of the,
no. That's what I'm saying. I'm not denying that, but I'm telling you that this thing that we're seeing, this beast, we need to recognize this is not a beast of racial injustice. And that's what I'm gonna even say. Like, I even think George Floyd was a horrible. You just
I don't agree. Keep
okay,
going.
that's good. I don't want
Keep
you to
going.
agree.
Keep going.
I want to be able to. I think that George Floyd was a horrible, horrible murder. But there have been countless horrible murders by police. I think the issue is definitely a racial issue, but I think it's even more an issue of police using positions of power doing it, because I've seen it. I've seen horrible things with where you had white cops killing George Floyd, and I've seen horrible things where white cops killing white people, and I've seen black cops killing white people. And I see that. I honestly think that if we had to choose, let's say right now, and say we can eliminate one, no more white cops killing black people, or no more cops using power murdering, meaning like those ego murders where like people are like, dude, get off the guy, like use your head, get in control of yourself, and this is not an ego trip, like you're killing a human being. If we got rid of those, there would be less deaths.
Mm.
And so
You're
therefore,
saying if we have better policies in place,
I'm
it
saying
would
if you
just
had to choose one of those two, I think that overall you want to know which one's going to take away more deaths from police caused deaths. I think that the second one would, because that's actually what we're actually saying is that I think that more people are dying at the hands of police, not
so
because of racial issues, but because of power issues. And I think that this, like if we want to talk about dealing with the issues that are here, and looking at the issues that are in front of us, we're, we're not choosing one. We're not saying this life is more important than that life. We're saying that we need to fix things and we need to grow.
yeah.
But right now, that's not what the issue is.
So
That's
again,
not what's
like
going on with Black Lives Matter. That's not what's going on with Antifa. That's not what's going on. What we're having is
so
that there's something bigger going on over here. And until people, my feeling is that if people don't recognize this, we're gonna be sliding downhill into hell, and we're
so
not even gonna realize it.
so Yehuda, so chazak. Like I love you like a brother. I love your neshama. I love learning Torah with you. I'm so happy you're in my life. I love you, and I so much disagree with what you just said.
Okay,
I just want you to know. And I still love you. And I
good.
still love you the same. I don't
And
even love you
I
even
might be
less.
wrong. I
I don't
might be
even love you
wrong.
any less. I don't. I think that when it comes to narratives and stories and scripts and who and what stories we inherit and what stories we tell and who gets to control the script and what we read and what we write, I think that like again, how much like memory do we have of like the wrongs of our ancestors, and what role do we play in the wrongs of our ancestors? And I just want to remind you, like again, like I want to double down on this, like the Civil War was predominantly fought because of slavery. There were other issues, economics, obviously, maybe it
Yes.
wasn't necessary, but we have to realize that even though the Confederacy lost, right? Like number one, illegal slavery still existed in many, many ways. We know during Reconstruction and Jim Crow, there's all these stages. But the reason why I'm sharing that is because like, where did all those people go? Like, they're still in the country. They still rise to power. They still, maybe they're
No, those
instead of
people are
taking,
actually dead. Now there are other people that still ascribe to some of those
bro,
beliefs.
they inherited their family story. They inherited their narrative that they inherited, and the narrative that they
No, we
inherited
don't just
was
inherit
that
narratives.
we
We
don't.
also grow. No, we do inherit sometimes, and we have a lot of things that we do inherit. But we also
I think we
then
believe deeply that we inherit narratives.
we
I think
do,
like that.
but we also create certain realities. Like
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure. We have to. We
I
have to.
think the
We
core
decide where the narrative
narrative of
goes.
America is a fight against racial injustice.
So, but what I want to point out, Yehuda, is that if this country is founded on a divide in this country, specifically around race, and that would play out, what we're discussing now, go back 150 years. This one topic of race, if you might want to call it, oh, it's the politicization of race in this generation that makes it so toxic. And Black Lives Matter is not even focusing on racial justice. They're focusing on dividing and fragmenting and taking over a whole violent and radical agenda. And all of those things that you're saying, like, still cannot discount the fact that this country had a civil war, literally. This soil, there were two, where I am at least, your Mamish and Adma Kodesh. It's what a crazy, wild place.
Civil wars here too, but yeah.
You know, yeah, I hear you. Listen, comparing, by the way, American racism to comparing American experiences to Israeli experience, that's like, maybe that's part Gimel, you know, part 3, there's more there, like, I think also. But I just think that, like, we can't forget that the struggles that we see in society, this is how I feel as a whole, and everything you're describing, and the radicalization and the sides of the aisle, like, and why people have all these stereotypes about Republicans being like anti-constitutional rights and law or something, like, you know, or the stereotypes about Democrats where they're all like, you know, hardcore
or
leftist,
Joe Biden,
liberal.
A presidential candidate making a comment like, a guy who you're not black if you vote Republican. Like,
I don't know.
No,
dude, it's a whole mess. It's a whole mess.
The things that are coming out are
it's a whole mess. It's a whole mess.
Yes.
It's a whole mess. I agree with you. It's like, and also, like, we shouldn't give any one human's word like the full mic to, like, decide what everyone's saying.
But
I hear you.
It's what's going on. We're recognizing what.
So I just would like my like statement in this moment would be like, if the Metzias is that there was a civil war in America that was fought because of race, it was a race war essentially, and it was in the foundation of this American democracy, right? And the literally, like, we have to understand these different pieces of histories, right? The 13th Amendment, right, which was basically to outlaw slavery, right, which was special, and then there's and then Immigration Amendment and the 14th Amendment, and then the 15th Amendment of not marginalizing groups for their immigration, like all these different things that were added. It was still in midst of a fractured nation, and so you fast forward 150 years of constant negotiation, by the way, around race since emancipation. What do you mean, like? We know, out of any people on the planet, we know the power of time and the influence of our inherited narratives and how it influences who we are. And it's true every generation, right? Chayav Adam, right? Like, right? There's an obligation. Laharos, liros, laharos. We're in it. We experienced it. We're doing it now. We had it before, right? Like, we know that we're inheritors. And so I would say that everything you just described to me is still symptoms of racism, of systemic institutionalized racism. I would still go back to saying all the chaos you described, which I agree with you is such a mess, is trying to distract us from the fact that racism is not a myth. It has happened. It has happened on this soil.
But that's not what I'm saying.
And we're inheriting. I'm not saying that
it's a myth.
A deep-seated issue in America. It is still with us, even after the emancipation, even after the civil rights. It's hard to shake something that you held on to for hundreds of years. You know what I mean? Sorry.
No, I love it. I love what you're saying, and also, like, I love the passion. I think this is what we're here for. But we need to put things into context and perspective. And you're right, meaning there's definitely. We're not saying that there's no racism. We're not saying that the issues of race are gone. We're not saying that, this happened and now it's over, so it's done. There's even if it was over and we could say it's out, you still have the people who are still there as products of that story. And it's not over. We know that there's still issues. Nobody's denying that. But what we are talking about, a lot of
people are denying that, Yehuda.
No, what the people that
I know a lot of people are denying that. I just want you to know. But
okay, so I think that the people, I think that, so I'm looking at, listen, you want to talk about some guy sitting in Walmart or
people who call me,
or sitting in the mikvah and saying something is one thing, but anybody who's in positions at least of government or with a voice, they're all saying, hey, we still need to make
Right.
to make policy, like was what we were saying in the beginning, to make policy to be able to help people and to help people advance from where we are now. But it's both sides of the aisle that are saying that. But there's something else that's going on over here. What the other thing that's going on over here, and that's why I'm trying to say is that I think that is it's not just taking the spotlight away from a racial issue. Is that I'm and this is where I'm saying maybe this is even wild, that I think that the George Floyd thing wasn't a racial issue. It was a great example that these guys were now able to jump on and now able to use it and to get the public into a state of frenzied outrage to promote a different agenda. I don't think it was a social. It was a racial justice issue that was at the core of it. And you think I could be wrong.
No, listen.
But I could be wrong,
Yeah.
but I don't think that these movements are coming from that place. I think they're using this as a tool to foment unrest, to promote their issue. And and guess what? If somebody was trying to use me, the first thing I would say, oh my God, I'm being used. I'm a pawn. You're taking a real issue and you're using it as a pawn to knock out your political enemy, or to try to gain power.
Right.
And so listen, I think that we both set our side. If you have one thing you want to add in, I would love to jump into where do the Jews fit in this story,
Ugh.
and how and like where are they going? Like I see, just, and you can, if you want to jump back and finish up with another thought, I see America core principles crumbling, and there being a big issue. And one thing I've seen throughout history, Jewish history, is that anytime that you begin to have core principles of a country begin to crumble, and you begin to get into a state of economic issues, the people that always get it are the Jews, right? America might have the history of taking advantage of black
The
people,
longest standing like safe place for Jews in
but
exile.
any country that we've ever been in, as soon as there's economic unrest and
Ugh.
social unrest and
Hashem
war,
should
and
help.
we always are the ones that get screwed
Hashem
the
should help.
most.
Lo aleinu, mamish lo aleinu.
So like my
Mashiach
feeling
should
is,
come before we ever hear of something so horrible. But listen, I think that our conversation is a microcosm of many others who are having conversations similar, and many others who are dafka staying away from each other because they don't want to have these conversations. So it should be that everything that we're trying to discuss is not only highlighting the many perspectives that exists in our society today in the 21st century American Jewry, not only highlighting that, but then I do agree with you that like, how do we, and I believe that the centrist movement, NAACP, all these different movements of dismantling racism in America would all agree with the sentiment that like it shouldn't be about the color of our skin, and it should be about equality for all, and it should be that these core American principles, the American promise, what we spoke about during part one even, is still intact, right? That is like, I think I agree with you that Americans across the aisle, like it doesn't matter where you sit, would
you
want
think it
that.
is intact?
Sorry?
You think that those core principles are still intact?
No. I mean, I think I agree with you. I think in a sad way, I don't want to manifest these harsh things, but I agree with you that the idea of the American promise right now is on trial. The idea of the American dream is on trial. A lot of people are looking at American democracy and questioning whether or not what was set out is what it is now. And even if it's not what was set out is what it is now, is there a future of America that's a kiyum of what America truly was?
I even saw some people proposing a two-state solution.
So that's been around for a while, though.
What are you talking about?
Well, yeah. Oh, reparations. Yeah. I mean, Louis Farrakhan, who's a Ravenist anti-Semite, one of his claims in his movement around Black Power and specifically the Nation of Islam is to draw a line, and reparations is that there's two governments, a Black government and a white government. This has been around.
I wasn't
The
talking
idea has been
about
around
that.
since the 60s or
I
50s.
don't think that's what they were proposing. I think they were proposing like a left and a right split.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, oh gosh.
I'm thinking that.
Bro, I'll just say, I mean, I hope we like turn this.
I don't think they would be able to split a white and a black. I think that there's too many people that would.
So that's
too
interesting.
many people that would be like, that's absurd.
Yehuda, I think about, my name is Yeshaya Yosef. I'm obsessed with visioning and dreaming, both going into the past and going into the future. I could use more gevura and being right now in the moment. And I constantly think about the fate and the future of America. Both as somebody who's an ancestor from someone who founded America, and then also just as a person who's benefited greatly from what America could offer the huddled masses, you know? And so like, I always say that like when people want to get into politics and fight about who should be president of the United States, and I always say, it's like, honestly, like, based on who wins the presidency, like there's still a huge divide in this nation. It almost does. Like, I don't want to like say things like it doesn't matter, because it really does matter. Like policy, like 4 years of having that pen does change economies, does change directions for another decade. You could literally cause wars under your presidency. Like there's absolutely like huge power in 4 years, but at the same time, like America's division is not going to depend on who ends up becoming the next president for this next White House term. Like, I think that like in general, there's a huge fragmentation, and it's not just one or two or three or five. It's like, you know, Havdil, as we say about the Shvatim, but it's like a Kala Mim. There's all these people who are looking for an American promise, but each of them have a different version of what the American promise looks like. So I'll just say, it's really messy. I think what we are trying to go towards, though, is having what our common vision is. Like, what is common for all of us? Like, what are we looking for? And like, there was a video I saw of this Black woman who said, like, we're not looking for revenge. We're looking for equality. Like, and maybe there are a lot of people who are looking for revenge, but the point that she's making, I think, about we are looking for equality is holding on to that American promise. That the Constitution, again, lahavdil, but how we view the Torah, right? That the Constitution, that the Declaration, that the Bill of Rights, that all these pieces are something that we are still in process of lifting up and building up. Again, lahavdil, how we talk about the Torah. The Torah is, right? We're literally right? Like we're literally processing and learning it over and over in a different way. And so, like, you know, I think there's big questions. Okay, so that's that. I'll stop there for a second on that. And then, like, the role, you know, what's the Jew? I mean, I'll tell you a story. I was in Greece for my honeymoon with my wife, and we were at the Chabad of Athens, and I was shocked. I was like, oh, there's no Jews on the island. Like, you know, I was wearing my yarmulke. So I was just like, anytime I saw a few people with baseball caps and like people in like skirt, you know, someone in a skirt and like a hoodie. And I was like, you know, and I was like, the hat and the skirt, I was like, forget it, you know, the guy in the hat and the lady in the skirt is over. So anyway, otherwise at the Chabad, for Shabbos, I was blown away. There was like 250 Israelis, all doing business. They all real estate, doing business. And Shal Shidduch, they asked me if I would give a Dvar Torah. And so I give a Dvar Torah in Hebrew, and talking about, it was right at the beginning of Sefer Shemos, how like, the Mechilta, how Jews the three things that didn't change, right? Their clothes, their dress, and their names. And how in society, like, I was like, in the Dvar Torah, at least I was trying to articulate it as well as I could in Hebrew, but in the Dvar Torah, at least I was like trying to express, like, where are there places in the world where we could truly retain those three things in this world today? Like, it's so chaotic. And obviously in a room full of Israelis, they're all like, Israel, 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 you know, they're all like yelling at me like, Ma pitom, you know, they're like, are you crazy? Like, asking me that question. And in the middle of my Dvar Torah, this one Israeli guy is like, who did you vote for? Like, And I was just like, and I immediately said, I was like, Ani begola, Ani Yisraeli, Ani, like, you know, I'm a Jew, like I'm in exile. Like, what are you talking to me about, like American politics? Like, that was basically my response to him. And he's like, I hope you voted for Trump in middle of my Dvar Dora. And I just kept going. I landed it, whatever, it was over. But I think the point is that, like, you know, I tell you that story because, like, personally, me, my identity, like how I feel, I don't want to speak for like all of American Jewry. I'll also say, stepping into this role, working as a rabbinic scholar and public affairs advisor at Jewish Federations of North America, where I am being given a microphone and a platform to like think about a lot more Jews than I've ever had to think about as it relates to, you know, Jewish community life in America during this generation. Like, that's like my avoda mamish, like it's what I do. You know, but I would say that, like, being in this moment, seeing that there's fragmentation. I'm not a political person. I'm trying to create ava. Like, I believe in avas chinam. Like, you know, I do. I believe in tshuva. I believe that we could unite. But with that said, like Zachor Yamot Olam, right? Like Hashemayim Misrapim Chvodo, like we have a memory. We inherit things, right? Hazino Shemayim V'Adaber V'Tishma Eretz Emrifi. Like there's things that we didn't maybe witness individually, but that we inherited, things that have happened. So the question of how do we specifically as Jews hold on to like our timeless nature while also engaging like in the moment? How do we stay rooted to our Masorah while also like sticking to like the cosmopolitan issues of the generation that affect all of us, whether it's like climate change or social equity or all these things that everybody's like, you know. But I think we really have the koach. I think that there's not a single nation who has the chops, who has, you know, going back to Klipas Noga, right? Who has experienced the good and the bad, who has the nega and the oneg, who's fit to be in this place to like lift up the voices. And we're all over the world. I spoke to a Jew in South Africa today. I spoke to you in Israel today. I spoke to somebody in London today. Like you know what I mean? Like
Isaiah,
we have the ability. We have the ability.
Amen. And I'll tell you, I think we definitely have a lot of food for thought. I do. And this was really amazing. Mamish amazing.
Yud, I love you so much. Raice Brothers podcast. Thank you for bringing me on.
We're gonna be back. I think this is it for now with the politics. I think that we have enough other things to talk about. But this was definitely. I hope that people, you know, expanded their thoughts and maybe just could open themselves and think about it a little bit more. Open the dialogue.
L'chaim, l'chaim.
L'chaim. Be blessed, everybody.
Love you guys.